I'll start with just some remarks regarding item A, which is an introduction of a resolution to support the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments regional housing targets for Montgomery County. I'd like to thank all my colleagues for co-sponsoring this particular resolution. Just want to note that this particular resolution really is as a result of a lot of work that has gone into place starting in 2018, when there were a number of folks, including Planning Advisory Chairs Andrew Trueblood, who is the Director of Planning for Washington, D.C., Wen Wright, our own Director of Planning for Montgomery County, as well as part of the Housing Advisory Chairs, which included Helen McLean, who was the Director of Housing for Alexandria, Virginia, as well as Polly Donaldson, Director of Housing for Washington, D.C. And they met throughout the year in 2018 to examine very closely not just the forecast for housing, but also job growth and many other indicators in order to assess whether the particular housing targets that were in place were sufficient. And they concluded that actually we needed to address a larger gap, and we needed to also pay very close attention to issues of affordability, as well as where these new housing units should be located. So a lot of work went into that, and then Council of Governments decided to put together a housing work group, a housing strategy work group that was comprised of members of the Council of Governments, members of the Board of Directors, and that included from Prince George's County, Councilmember Derek Davis. He was the chair of the strategy group. From the District of Columbia, Councilmember Anita Bonds. From the District of Columbia, the Senior Advisor Beverly Perry. She's Senior Advisor to the Mayor, Mayor Bowser. Fairfax County Supervisor John Faust. City of Alexandria Mayor Justin Wilson. And myself representing Montgomery County. And so we met throughout this year in order to listen, examine, study the proposal that was, the options that were placed in front of us. And then after all of those meetings, we actually had a retreat with the rest of the members of the board of the Council of Governments to truly have a conversation regarding the region. And I got to tell you, it's not an easy thing to have the leadership, the elected leadership from throughout the region, because we all know that the Washington metropolitan region is just not urban centers, but it also includes rural areas, suburban area exurbs as well. But everybody was really focused on how can we recommit ourselves to a thriving region that addresses challenges like housing, like transportation, like education, as well as things like healthcare, just quality of life issues, because everybody understands that at the end of the day, unless we address all of these policy areas, it's going to be difficult to maintain the high quality of life and remain competitive. And so even though different elected officials have different interests, different mandates, different characteristics of their jurisdictions, lo and behold, we were able to come together during that retreat and agree. And there was a lot of back and forth, but we were able to achieve that particular consensus. And so what the Council of Governments eventually adopted, and it was a vote by the members of the Board of Directors on September 11th, was that we needed at least 320,000 units. This is regional, between 2020 and 2030. But that specifically 75% of those units should be affordable to mid-income and low-income individuals or families, and that 75% of that new housing should be in activity centers. Now, for Montgomery County, because at the end of the day, this is the regional target, and then each jurisdiction has to look at what portion of that, corresponds to each area. So for us, the share of the target would be 41,000 units between 2020 and 2030. And so we also know that we have some incorporated areas of the county, like Tacoma Park, like Gaithersburg, like Rockville, who will also take a look at their share, and they have agreed to be part of this resolution today as well. Now, for us, what does this mean? Well, we've already adopted so many policies that, in my opinion, has put us ahead in the sense that things like, for example, activity centers, very much tied to where we have our transportation assets. The transit-oriented development is something that we have been looking at. We have been so busy looking at how we can promote affordability. The Fed committee led by Councilmember Reamer has looked at, particular ways and creative ways, and we just took that unanimous vote regarding our accessory dwelling units. And so we have been busy also putting together a strategy that works for Montgomery County. This particular resolution today, what it does is it just sends a signal that Montgomery County is a willing player and it is ready to do our share, to also have a central and play a central role in the region and the region's desire to continue to be economically stable and able to compete on the national level. And so it's not as if we have not been doing this. We're literally just saying we want to be in the sandbox and we want to be partners with leadership in our region. So that's what we're doing today. And as you recall, we also had a really awesome panel on October 15th, when we had Wen Wright, our county planning director. We have Asim Nigam from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs director. We also had Bob Buchanan, and we have Maya Brennan, Senior Policy Associates, and Leah Hendy from Urban Institute. And I specifically invited those folks to be part of the panel so that we could understand not only the issues that DHCA is looking at, but also what the private sector is talking about, what think tanks are talking about, and what our planning folks are talking about in terms of how we can move forward. So I really appreciate all my colleagues. I specifically want to point out, again, the leadership of Councilmember Hans Reamer for the innovative approach. It was interesting because during the retreat, we also heard from different folks, like, for example, Minneapolis, to see what they're doing. And these are things that we have already had some conversations about. So, again, I think we're on the right track. So that's what's before us today. And, again, I just truly appreciate my colleagues' support and the loud, resounding statement that this council is going to make by adopting this resolution and affirming our commitment to working towards those targets. What are the next steps? Well, we have the Fed committee that's going to be super busy taking a look at what we're doing currently. So that is pretty much, hey, how far along are we? But then also, what are those barriers that we may have to address in order to get us there as well? So thank you again. And lastly, just reminding ourselves that, we will also be entertaining a resolution to adopt an economic development platform on November 5th. This particular action is squarely in one of those pillars, which is the housing piece. Because again, unless we look at things like housing, unless we look at workforce development, transportation, business retention, business expansion and attraction, we're not going to be able to hit those particular goals when it also comes to economic development, which will help us get the revenue that we need in order to address all of the issues and pay for all those services that our county residents, so much desire. So this is one very important step forward in that way.